My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 29 years old, and I'll never forget the day my boss fired me in front of the entire office over a laptop. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind where you expect nothing more than endless emails and stale coffee. Instead, I was summoned into the conference room where my boss, Mr. Reynolds, was already red-faced with anger. The HR manager sat stiffly beside him, and half the office had gathered just outside the glass wall to watch. He slammed a silver laptop onto the table so hard the screen flickered. "This is company property," he barked, "and you, Ethan, treated it like it was trash." I blinked at him, stunned. That laptop wasn't even mine. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but before I could explain, his voice rose louder. "We don't need careless employees here. Pack your things. You're done." Gasps echoed from the hallway. I felt my stomach drop, my palms sweat. Years of hard work, late nights, and loyalty reduced to nothing with a single accusation. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but he cut me off with a smirk. "Don't bother. Everyone knows the truth. Everyone. My coworkers, my friends, my reputation shattered in seconds." I stood there in silence as HR slid a termination paper toward me, and the whispers outside the glass grew louder. I could feel the humiliation burning across my skin. They thought I'd walk out broken, ashamed, finished. But what they didn't know was that this moment, the one meant to end me, was the very moment that would make me. Because the same laptop that destroyed my job ended up costing them $7,600,000. I started working at the company when I was just 23. Fresh out of college, hungry to prove myself, I thought I had landed my dream job. The office was sleek. The name carried weight, and when I told my parents I had been hired, their pride in me was enough to make me forget the long nights of unpaid internships that had led there. But it didn't take long for me to realize that not all employees were treated the same. From day one, my boss had a favorite, Derek, a coworker who had a knack for charming his way into every promotion, every opportunity, every spotlight. Derek wasn't smarter or harder working than the rest of us, but he had something I didn't. He was the golden child of the office. I became the scapegoat. Whenever something went wrong, my name somehow ended up attached to it. If a deadline slipped, it was because I hadn't been proactive. If a client wasn't happy, it was because I didn't communicate well. It didn't matter that I was the one staying late, fixing the messes Derek left behind. In meetings, my ideas were brushed aside until Derek repeated them, and then suddenly, they were brilliant. One of the first real blows came when a promotion I had worked toward for years was handed to Derek. I had completed the project. I had the numbers. I had the results. Everyone knew it. But at the announcement, my boss looked straight at Derek and said, "Outstanding leadership." "You've earned this," I clapped with the rest of the office, but inside, something cracked. Another time, during a quarterly review meeting, I had prepared a full presentation with charts, strategies, and solutions. I barely got through the first slide before my boss interrupted. "That's enough, Ethan." "Derek, why don't you take it from here?" Derek walked up with his trademark smirk, presented my work as if it was his own, and walked away with applause. I sat down, my face burning, wondering if anyone else saw what had just happened, or if they all preferred not to. Still, I pushed forward. I told myself hard work would eventually speak louder than favoritism. I stayed late. I double-checked every file. I built a quiet reputation with clients who appreciated my reliability. But inside the office, my value was invisible. Then came the laptop. It started small. A company laptop that Derek had borrowed and mishandled. He left it behind in a client's office one day, and when it was returned, the screen was cracked, the hard drive fried. IT logged the damage, but somewhere between the report and the paperwork, my name appeared on the responsibility line. When I confronted the office manager, she shrugged. "That's what came from upstairs. Talk to your boss if you've got a problem." I knew what that meant. Derek had connections. I didn't. That evening, as I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, an older colleague named Mr. Harris stopped by. He had been at the company for over 20 years, a quiet man who rarely spoke but always noticed. He leaned on the cubicle wall and said softly, "You need to document everything, Ethan. Every email, every file, every time they try to pin something on you. Keep records. One day, you'll need them." His advice stuck with me. From that moment, I began saving every email, every project file, every receipt of my work. I didn't know why I would need them, but something in my gut told me Harris was right. The months that followed were heavier. Every success I achieved was stripped from me, every mistake inflated until it was all anyone remembered. My boss had a way of mocking me with a smile, like humiliating me was entertainment. "Don't take it personally," he'd say in front of the team. "Ethan just has to toughen up." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, even though inside it felt like I was breaking. What kept me going was the belief that eventually the truth had to matter, that one day effort and honesty would count for something. But deep down, another part of me knew something darker. My boss wasn't just going to sideline me. He was going to make an example out of me. And when that day finally came, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was a spectacle. He would stand me up in front of the entire office, point to that broken laptop, and strip away my career with a single sentence. And in that moment, with the world watching through glass walls and gossiping mouths, everything I thought I'd built would collapse. Or so they thought. The morning it happened felt like any other. I walked into the office with my usual coffee, nodding at the receptionist, settling into my cubicle. But before I could even power up my computer, a message popped up on my screen. "Report to the conference room." Now it was from my boss. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a notebook and walked down the hall. As I reached the glass-walled conference room, I saw them. Mr. Reynolds, red-faced already, the HR manager sitting stiffly beside him, and Derek leaning against the far wall like he had front-row seats to a show he'd been waiting for. The door shut behind me, and instantly Reynolds' voice boomed. He shoved a silver laptop across the table, the cracked screen flickering as it slid to a stop in front of me. "Do you recognize this?" I blinked at it, confused. "That's not mine. I haven't used that one in weeks." His eyes narrowed, his voice rising. "This was checked out under your name. Company property, and now it's damaged beyond repair." I opened my mouth, but before I could finish the word mistake, he slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. You've been careless for too long. Clients complain, deadlines slip, and now this? We don't need employees who treat us like a joke." Behind the glass, I realized half the office had stopped to watch. Coworkers lingered in the hallway, whispering, pressing close to the windows. Some had their phones in their hands, recording. My humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was a spectacle. I tried again, my voice shaking but steady. "I didn't break that laptop. Derek borrowed it." Derek chuckled from the corner, smug and untouchable. Blaming me now? Classic Ethan. The HR manager slid a folder toward me, her face expressionless. Inside was a termination form, already filled out with my name. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You're finished here. Pack up your desk. Security will escort you out." Gasps rippled outside the glass. I could hear someone whisper, "They're firing him?" Just like that, I felt the heat rise in my chest, my heart hammering, but I forced myself to breathe. Years of late nights, of cleaning up other people's mistakes, of staying invisible, it all crashed into this moment. "You can't just," I started, but he cut me off with a smirk. "Don't bother. Everyone knows the truth. You're careless, Ethan. Always have been." The words stung worse than the firing itself, not because they were true, they weren't, but because for so long, that's what everyone believed. The HR manager tapped the paper with her pen. "We need your signature." I stared at it. The letters of my name typed out so neatly on a document meant to erase me. My hands trembled. I thought of my grandmother's voice, of Harris's advice to keep records, of every insult I had swallowed in silence. I knew signing wouldn't make this go away. It would just make it official. Finally, I pushed the folder back across the table. My voice was low but firm. "I'm not signing this." Reynolds' face twisted in fury. "Then we'll mark it as refusal. Either way, you're done." He stood, yanked open the door, and barked to the office, "Ethan Miller has been terminated effective immediately. Let this be a lesson. This company has no room for incompetence." The words echoed through the hall. Coworkers looked away awkwardly, some ashamed, some curious, some just hungry for gossip. I gathered my things under 100 staring eyes. Each step back to my desk felt heavier than the last. I kept my face calm, but inside I was breaking apart. By the time I walked out of the building with my box of belongings, my career felt like it had ended. My boss had crushed me in front of everyone, and now I was unemployed, humiliated, and labeled careless. But what Reynolds didn't realize, what Derek didn't realize, what even I barely realized at that moment was this: the paper they shoved in front of me, the accusations they made, the scene they staged. Those things weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of theirs. And the bill for what they did to me would come due sooner than they ever imagined. By the next morning, the news had already spread beyond the office walls. Word travels fast in corporate hallways, but this time it traveled faster, louder, crueler. My inbox was flooded with emails I couldn't bear to open, some pitying, some smug, and a few from old friends who just wanted to confirm the rumors. The company wasted no time making it official. An all-staff email went out with my name in bold letters. Effective immediately, Ethan Miller is no longer with the company. Any inquiries should be directed to management. Just one line, cold and final, like my years of effort had meant nothing. Coworkers who once stopped by my desk for help now avoided me in the parking lot. Some whispered to each other as I walked past. Others shook their heads like they'd known all along that I wasn't going to last. By lunch, the story had spread to clients. One even called me personally, asking, "What did you do?" My throat tightened. I couldn't answer. But the worst was hearing my own boss talk about me outside the building. I'd gone back to return my ID badge when I overheard him on the phone, his voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. "We had to cut him loose. Careless people cost us money. I won't keep dead weight on my team dead weight." That was the label he stamped on me. Years of unpaid overtime, covering for Derek, fixing other people's mistakes, reduced to dead weight. I walked out of that building for the last time, and the sting of humiliation followed me like a shadow. At family gatherings, relatives gave me curious looks. "We heard you lost your job," they said, their voices dripping with polite judgment. Friends texted me links to gossip threads where anonymous comments about the laptop guy were piling up. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't. Instead, I started pulling files. Every email I had saved, every performance report I'd tucked away, every note from Harris's advice. Nights turned into long hours at my kitchen table, the glow of my old personal laptop lighting up proof after proof that I wasn't the careless one. I had timelines, logs, correspondence that clearly showed Derek had borrowed that machine. I had messages where I begged for more resources while Reynolds brushed me off with a smirk. I had years of paper cuts turned into scars, and now they were all evidence. Still, the humiliation didn't stop. Derek, emboldened by my absence, bragged openly at the office. Former coworkers sent me screenshots of group chats where he joked, "Wonder if Ethan dropped his laptop down the stairs, lol." My name had become a punchline. The company's public stance didn't help. In a quarterly meeting, Reynolds apparently told the entire staff, "We won't tolerate incompetence. We made an example and will continue to hold that standard." He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew. For a while, it felt like they had won. I kept my head down, applied for jobs, and endured the looks of suspicion when interviewers glanced at the termination on my record. It was like being trapped in a glass box. Everyone could see me, but no one really wanted to listen. But quietly, I kept building my case. Every insult, every lie, every careless remark Reynolds had made became fuel. I spoke to a lawyer I'd been referred to by Harris, the older colleague who had once told me to keep records. When I laid the files across his desk, his eyes widened. "Ethan," he said, his voice slow, "do you realize what you have here? This isn't just wrongful termination. This is discrimination. This is defamation. This could be a multi-million-dollar case." For the first time since that glass-walled firing, my chest lifted. They had wanted to bury me under shame, to make me the joke of the office, the community, the industry. But in their arrogance, they had handed me everything I needed. They thought they had written the final chapter of my career. What they didn't realize was that they had just given me the opening lines of their downfall. And soon, the world would stop laughing at me and start looking at them. The whispers might have been enough to ruin me on their own, but Reynolds wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted to grind me into the ground until there was nothing left. 2 weeks after I was fired, the company hosted a client appreciation event downtown. I had no reason to be there, of course, but fate has a cruel way of writing scenes you don't plan for. I was invited by an old client who wanted to thank me personally for a project I'd completed before everything blew up. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to walk into a room full of people who'd only heard the company's side, but something inside me told me to go. When I arrived, the hall was buzzing with chatter, glasses clinking, suits shining under the lights. I tried to keep to the side, blending in, but it didn't take long for Reynolds to notice me. His face lit up, not with surprise, but with opportunity. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "If it isn't Ethan Miller." Surprised you'd show your face here. Conversations hushed. Eyes turned. I felt the same sting I'd felt in that conference room, the crowd circling like sharks smelling blood. Reynolds smirked and held up a glass of wine like he was making a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen, you all know we had to let Ethan go. Careless with company property, unprofessional conduct, the laptop incident." He chuckled, and a few people laughed nervously along with him. Let this be a reminder. Our company doesn't tolerate incompetence. My chest tightened. My name wasn't just mud in the office anymore. It was being dragged through the dirt in front of clients, partners, and strangers. I could have walked away. Maybe that's what he expected me to do. Lower my head, swallow the shame. But instead, I met his gaze and said clearly, "You know that's not the truth." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. No one expected me to push back. Reynolds' smile faltered, but only for a second. "Careful, Ethan. You're already finished. Don't embarrass yourself further." That's when I noticed it. The faint red glow of a phone camera across the room. One of my old colleagues was filming. Quietly, discreetly, but filming nonetheless. And judging by the angle, it wasn't just a recording. The little icon blinking on the screen told me everything. Live stream. I realized then that I wasn't just speaking to the people in the hall. I was speaking to whoever was watching in real time. Coworkers, clients, maybe even competitors. I straightened my shoulders. You fired me without evidence. You accused me of something I didn't do, and now you're parading me around like a warning sign to cover your own failures. That laptop, everyone here knows who really broke it. Gasps spread through the hall. Derek, who was standing smugly nearby, shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds' face flushed deep red. "Enough," he barked, slamming his glass down so hard it cracked. "You're nothing, Ethan." Nothing but a disgruntled ex-employee. No one here believes you. But the murmurs said otherwise. People were exchanging glances, whispering to each other, pulling out their phones. The live stream kept rolling, capturing every word, every flicker of desperation on Reynolds' face. Melissa's slap had been my humiliation in another story. Here, Reynolds' words were his own undoing. The angrier he got, the clearer it became to everyone that he wasn't defending the company. He was attacking me to hide the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just said, "You may have ended my job, but you won't end my name. And soon, the truth will speak louder than your lies." The room went silent. And somewhere out there, through that live stream, the silence spread. I walked out of the hall, my heart pounding, my palms still sweating, but my head held higher than it had in years. Reynolds thought he had humiliated me. What he didn't realize was that the clip of that night, the mocking, the accusations, the crack of his voice when he lost control, would become the final nail in his coffin. Because humiliation is a weapon, and once the world sees who's really holding it, the blade cuts the other way. 2 days after that client event, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was sharp, calm, and professional. "Mr. Miller, my name is Claire Donovan. I'm an employment lawyer. I believe we need to talk." I hesitated. "How did you—" "I saw the clip," she said simply. "Everyone did. It was streamed, Ethan. Your boss just handed you the strongest case I've seen in years." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The clip. I hadn't dared watch it, but apparently half the industry had. Reynolds thought he was burying me in public shame, but what he really did was give me free evidence. Claire invited me to her office the next morning. When I arrived, she already had a folder thicker than a textbook sitting on her desk. "I did some digging," she said. "Wrongful termination is one thing. But when you add public defamation, hostile work environment, and retaliation, we're not just looking at damages. We're looking at millions." I slid the files I'd been keeping across the desk, emails, performance reviews, IT logs proving Derek had checked out that laptop. Claire flipped through them, her expression growing sharper by the page. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ethan, they thought you were weak. What they didn't know is that you've been building a case for years. It was the first time anyone had ever called me strong. That same week, Claire filed the lawsuit. The company was served and the silence from their side was deafening. No smug remarks, no public comments. They were scrambling. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from Reynolds and the company's attorneys in a glassy downtown office. He looked smaller now, his confidence cracked. He tried to sneer, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. His lawyer started the meeting with the usual arrogance. This is a baseless claim. Mr. Miller is simply bitter over losing his job. Claire didn't flinch. She slid a USB drive across the table. This is the live stream clip. Your client mocking my client in front of dozens of witnesses, making false accusations without evidence. I also have emails showing years of discrimination, records proving the laptop was borrowed by another employee, and termination papers signed without due process. If you'd like, I can introduce this evidence in front of a judge. Or, she leaned forward, we can talk settlement. The room went silent. Reynolds' face drained of color. He glanced at the lawyers, then at me. For the first time, his eyes didn't burn with contempt. They burned with fear. His attorney cleared his throat. What exactly are you asking for? Claire didn't blink. $7,600,000. Paid in full. Confidentiality clause optional. Reynolds slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion! Claire didn't even look at him. This is evidence, Mr. Reynolds. And if you'd like, we can let the jury decide how much it's worth when they see you screaming in that clip. The lawyers whispered frantically. Reynolds' hand shook. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw desperation. Ethan, he muttered, his voice cracking. We don't have to do this. You can still walk away. I met his eyes, steady. You should have thought about that before you tried to destroy me. The meeting ended with a signed agreement. $7,600,000. No trial, no headlines, just numbers on paper and a signature that said everything he had done to me came with a price tag. As I walked out of that building, settlement papers in my hand, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, justice, and something else, a weight lifting off my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. They had mocked me, humiliated me, paraded me as an example of failure. And now, their arrogance had cost them millions. Claire shook my hand firmly at the door. Congratulations, Ethan. You didn't just win. You proved them wrong in the only language they understand. For the first time, I believed it. And I knew one thing for certain. Reynolds' voice, once so loud and mocking, would never echo over mine again. The ink on the settlement papers was barely dry when the whispers began to change. For months, my name had been dragged through dirt. The laptop guy. The careless employee who'd been fired in shame. But once the lawsuit leaked, once the community realized the company had paid millions to keep it quiet, everything flipped. At first, the company tried to hide it. They kept the settlement under wraps. No public statement, no press release. But secrets don't last long in a town where gossip spreads faster than fire. By the end of the week, word had slipped into LinkedIn circles, Slack groups, and even neighborhood coffee shops. People asked quietly at first, "Did you hear what happened with Ethan?" Then louder, "The company had to pay him how much?" Reynolds, once the untouchable boss who barked orders and crushed reputations, suddenly found himself under a microscope. The board of directors wanted answers. Shareholders wanted to know why millions had been drained from the company's accounts. Clients wanted reassurance that their money wasn't being wasted on legal disasters. And Reynolds had nothing to offer but excuses. His power unraveled piece by piece. First, the board stripped him of decision-making authority. Then came the announcement, effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds has resigned to pursue personal opportunities. Everyone knew it wasn't resignation. It was exile. Derek, the golden boy who had smirked in the corner during my firing, didn't escape either. Screenshots of emails surfaced. Emails where he had requested the laptop I was blamed for. Coworkers whispered about his role in the mess. He became radioactive overnight, no company willing to touch him. He quietly deleted his social media and faded from the spotlight. The company itself suffered too. Clients began pulling contracts. If they treat their employees like that, one major partner reportedly said, how can we trust them with our business? Within months, revenue dipped and rumors of layoffs began circulating. The empire Reynolds had built on intimidation was collapsing. Meanwhile, my phone started buzzing in a different way. Old colleagues reached out quietly, some apologizing for staying silent when I was humiliated. You didn't deserve what happened, one wrote. I should have spoken up. Others asked if I needed help on projects or if I was starting something of my own. The respect I had begged for inside those glass walls was finally mine. Only it wasn't because of them. It was because I had stood my ground, even when they tried to break me. With part of the settlement money, I bought a modest home, not flashy, not loud, but mine. For the first time in years, I opened the door to a place that was truly mine, without the echo of someone else's rules or judgments. I also started a small consulting firm, helping businesses with compliance and employee rights. Irony wasn't lost on me. The man fired as an example of incompetence was now advising companies on how to avoid lawsuits like the one that had cost Reynolds his career. The local community reacted the way communities always do, half in whispers, half in applause. Some still tilted their heads when they saw me, as if trying to reconcile the humiliated man they remembered with the one standing tall now. Others, especially younger professionals, reached out for guidance. How did you do it? They asked. I told them the truth. Document everything. Stand your ground. Never let someone else define your worth. But the fallout wasn't just professional, it was personal. My parents, who had once looked at me with disappointment when I lost my job, now sat at my kitchen table, struggling to hide their pride. We always knew you'd land on your feet, my father said, awkwardly. I didn't call him out on the lie. Some wounds aren't worth reopening. Melissa, the sister who had mocked me in her own way years before, called one evening just to say, I watched the clip. I can't believe they did that to you. I'm sorry. The words surprised me, but I realized they weren't for me. They were for her own conscience. I let her have them. Reynolds, on the other hand, disappeared from sight. Rumor had it he tried starting a new firm, but no one wanted to work with him. Too toxic, too reckless. His once commanding name had turned into a cautionary tale. The irony of it all was almost poetic. The same man who had stood in front of the office and shouted, "Let this be a lesson," had become the lesson himself. Every HR seminar, every manager's meeting in the company now whispered about the danger of mishandling employees. They used my story as the example, and I carried that with me, not as bitterness, but as proof. Proof that the humiliation they had forced me to endure wasn't the end. Proof that sometimes the fall of the powerful isn't loud. It's a series of whispers that strip them down piece by piece, until nothing remains. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the sting of that moment, the laptop shoved across the table, the whispers outside the glass, the smirk on Derek's face. The scars didn't vanish with the money, but they reminded me of something deeper. I had survived, and survival has its own kind of power. One evening, as I walked through my office, the new one with my name on the door and people who actually respected me, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't see the humiliated employee anymore. I saw someone stronger, someone who had been broken in public and rebuilt in silence. They thought firing me would bury me. Instead, it planted me. And from that soil of humiliation, I grew into something they could never crush again. The fallout had taken them down, but it had lifted me up. And that was the truest justice of all. The first morning I woke up in my new home, sunlight streaming through the curtains. It felt unreal. For years, I had opened my eyes to dread, emails waiting to criticize, bosses waiting to humiliate, colleagues waiting to whisper. Now, the only thing waiting for me was silence and peace. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the settlement paperwork one last time. $7,600,000, a number that still felt like it belonged in someone else's life. But it was mine. Not because I was lucky, not because I played dirty, but because I endured, and because the truth had finally spoken louder than their lies. Money couldn't erase the scars, but it gave me the freedom I had never tasted before. Freedom from people who thought they owned me. Freedom from the shame they tried to brand onto my name. Freedom to build something on my own terms. I thought back to that day in the conference room, the laptop sliding across the table, Reynolds' voice booming, Derek smirking in the corner, the whispers pressing against the glass walls. I had walked out of there feeling finished. But now, sitting here, I realized something powerful. That was the day I was reborn. They had tried to reduce me to nothing. But nothing became the foundation for everything. Sometimes I still hear Reynolds' words echo in my head. "You're finished here." And I smile, because he was right, but not in the way he thought. I was finished being their scapegoat. Finished begging for scraps of recognition. Finished living small so others could feel big. What followed wasn't just revenge. It was transformation. Because real justice isn't about destroying others. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. When neighbors or old colleagues ask me what I learned from it all, I tell them this: respect is worth more than any paycheck. Peace of mind is priceless. And sometimes the smallest accusation, the crack in a laptop, the whisper of a lie, can end up exposing the biggest truth. I don't regret the years I spent in that office, even though they nearly broke me. Those years taught me resilience. They taught me how to stand tall when people tried to cut me down. They taught me the difference between being liked and being respected. And most of all, they taught me that family isn't just the people you're born to, and work isn't just the place you clock in. Family is anyone who stands by you when the world turns its back. Work is anywhere your efforts are valued, your voice heard, your worth recognized. The scars remain. I still remember the sting of humiliation, the heat of whispers, the weight of carrying shame that wasn't mine. But now, those scars don't hurt. They remind me of what I survived. I closed the folder, pushed the paperwork aside, and took a long sip of coffee. The sun was warm on my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a blow. I was simply living. And as I looked out the window at the quiet street, I thought of the words I wished someone had told me when I was at my lowest. You are not defined by who fires you. You are defined by how you rise afterward. They thought the laptop would end me. Instead, it bought me freedom. And that, I realized, was the sweetest justice of all.